I used to believe there were things in this world that simply couldn't happen to people like me. Ordinary things, simple routines, a small town where nothing much changed. I clung to those little rituals. The kettle whistling at dawn, the creak of the porch swing as he read the paper, the subtle warmth of his palm covering mine when he handed me my coffee, his ring always cool against my skin. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. That morning started like any other, and yet, even now, I can't help but replay the details, searching for what I missed. My husband, Mark, stood by the fridge in his faded blue robe, humming something tuneless. He smiled, but I noticed he didn't meet my eyes, and I chalked it up to the usual, a Monday's haze. He kissed my forehead, said, "Back soon, Em. Just out for milk," and the door closed behind him. He didn't come back. I watched the sun crawl across the kitchen floor, the clock hands dragging. At first, I worried about flat tires or long lines at the store. Then I started calling. His phone rang once, twice, and then straight to voicemail. I left a message. "Mark, let me know you're okay. Love you." By lunchtime, dread settled over me like a thick, wet blanket. I drove to the store, half expecting to see his car in the lot. No sign. I asked the clerk, a boy with acne and a badge that read Tyler, if he'd seen my husband. He shrugged, said, "Sorry, ma'am, not today." By dusk, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone calling the police. "He just went out for milk. It's been all day." The dispatcher's voice was polite but tired. "Adults are allowed to leave, ma'am. Any indication he meant to disappear?" I wanted to scream. No, he just kissed me goodbye." You're watching Women Unwritten. Tap like and subscribe so more voices get heard. That first night, I lay in our bed, staring at the empty space where his body should have been. I tried to be logical. Maybe he'd had a breakdown. Maybe he needed space. But the truth scratched beneath my skin. Something was wrong. Wrong in a way that made my teeth ache and my breath come shallow. The police came the next morning. 2 officers, both young, both men. They asked if we'd argued, if he'd ever talked about running away. They took notes on a cheap pad and gave me a smile that felt like a pat on the head. "He'll probably be back soon. These things happen." I wanted to shake them. Mark wasn't impulsive. He wasn't the type to abandon his life, his job at the insurance firm, his mother, me. The house was untouched, wallet gone, phone gone, but his toothbrush still damp. His favorite shoes missing, but his running shoes left behind. They called it a midlife crisis, as if a man could unravel in the time it takes to drive to the store. 3 days passed. The silence grew louder. I stopped sleeping. Mark's mother, Lorraine, called every hour. "Have you heard anything, Em? He wouldn't do this, not to us." On the 4th day, I went through his dresser, searching for a clue. A note, a receipt, anything. I found a shirt I didn't recognize, a crisp white button-down, still wrapped in tissue, with a dry cleaner's tag from a place across town we'd never used. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Why would he hide a shirt? I called the dry cleaner. The woman on the line sounded confused. "Yes, I remember Mr. Foster. He picked up 2 shirts last week. Said he had an important meeting." Important meeting? Mark's office was casual. He'd never worn anything like that to work. I started to question everything. His late nights, the way he sometimes silenced his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he'd been jumpy lately, locking his briefcase, flinching at sudden noises. On the 6th day, a detective named Diaz called. She sounded weary. "We haven't found his car. No sign of credit card activity. I'm sorry, Mrs. Foster, but sometimes people just leave." But Mark wouldn't just leave. Not without saying something. Not without saying goodbye. I dug through our finances, every bank statement, every bill. I found nothing unusual, except for a cash withdrawal. $500, 2 days before he vanished. I called the bank. They couldn't tell me anything more. I went to his office, hoping for answers. His boss looked at me with pity. He seemed fine, Em. Maybe a little distracted. He said he needed some time off for family stuff. We thought maybe his mom was sick again. Lorraine was fine. I felt the walls closing in. I started to wonder if I'd ever really known him at all. That night, I sat in the dark with a bottle of wine, scrolling through his old emails. Nothing. No clues. No secret messages. I started to cry, ugly and deep, the kind of crying that leaves you gasping. A week after he vanished, I found the first real clue. It happened by accident. I was cleaning the upstairs hallway when I noticed the floorboard near the linen closet felt loose. I pried it up, expecting to find old toys or maybe a forgotten sock. Instead, there was a small metal box. Inside, Mark's old passport, a phone I'd never seen before, an old model, battered, dead, and a stack of photographs. My hands shook as I flipped through them. Pictures of Mark in places I didn't recognize. Standing in front of a nondescript motel. Posing with people I'd never met. Men, women, a child with dark hair, and Mark's smile. My heart hammered in my chest. I plugged in the phone. It took hours to charge, and when it finally powered on, it was locked. 4 digits. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. His birthday. Nothing. I stared at the photos again. In one, Mark stood next to a woman with a scar on her cheek. Behind them, a hotel sign, the Pinecrest. I Googled it, a cheap motel on the edge of town. I drove there, adrenaline making my hands tremble on the steering wheel. I showed the photo to the man behind the desk. He squinted. Yeah, that's him. Checked in a few times, always paid cash. Never stayed long. I asked about the woman. He shrugged. No idea. They argued a lot. Sometimes he'd come alone. I drove home numb, the puzzle pieces rattling in my mind. Who was that woman? Who was the child? Why the secret phone? That night, the phone buzzed. A text appeared, short and chilling. Don't trust anyone, not even the police. I stared at the message, heart pounding. Who was this? Was Mark still alive? And if so, why was he hiding? I sat on the floor until dawn, the message burned into my brain. The police didn't believe me. Mark's boss thought he was on vacation. His mother was falling apart. I was utterly alone. But I wasn't giving up. I would find out the truth, no matter what it cost. The next morning, I drove to the motel again. I convinced the manager to let me see the room Mark had used. The sheets were clean, the air stale. In the trash, I found a receipt from a diner in town. On the back, someone had scrawled a phone number and a name. Jess. I dialed the number with trembling fingers. It rang and rang, then a woman's voice answered, wary. Hello? I swallowed hard. My name is Emily Foster. I think you knew my husband. A long pause, then a sigh. Meet me at the diner in an hour. Come alone. I hung up, feeling like I was stepping off a cliff. I didn't know who Jess was, or why Mark had been meeting her. I didn't know why the police seemed so uninterested, or why someone was warning me to trust no one. But I was done waiting for answers to find me. I was going to find them myself. I changed my clothes, brushed my hair, and looked in the mirror. My face looked older, drawn. My eyes were fierce. I would not be the woman who sat at home, waiting for someone else to fix this. I would not be invisible. Not anymore. I drove to the diner, heart hammering, and walked inside. Jess was waiting for me in a corner booth, her eyes wary, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. She looked up as I approached, and I saw the scar on her cheek from the photo. I slid into the booth, my voice barely steady. Who are you? What do you know about my husband? Jess looked at me for a long time, her eyes hard and sad. You really don't know, do you? I shook my head. She leaned in, voice low. Mark wasn't who you think he was, And if you're not careful, you're going to end up just like him. Missing. My world tilted on its axis. All I could do was listen as she began to talk. She stared at me, her gaze flat and measuring, as if deciding whether I was worth the risk. I remember the clatter of dishes behind the counter and the flicker of neon against the window. Everything suddenly sharp and threatening. Jess didn't speak right away. She sipped her coffee, then finally set it down with a soft clink. "You're in over your head, Emily," she said quietly. "Mark should have told you, but he never did. He kept you out of all of it." "All of what?" My voice was trembling, but I tried to hold it steady. She glanced around, as if expecting someone to be listening. "He got involved with some people who don't take kindly to questions. If you're smart, you'll forget about all this. Go home." I shook my head. "I can't. I need to know what happened to him. Please." I felt like I was begging, but I didn't care. I'd lost all sense of pride. I just needed answers. She closed her eyes for a moment, rubbing her temple. "He was helping me. That's how it started. My ex, he was dangerous. Mark helped me disappear for a while. But then, he got pulled in deeper. He started running errands, passing messages, things like that. I told him to stop, but he said he owed me." "Owed you for what?" My voice came out rough. Jess looked away. "He saved my life." I tried to piece together the timeline, but nothing made sense. Mark had never mentioned Jess, never mentioned any of this. I didn't know if I believed her, but something about the way she spoke, the exhaustion in her face, the way her hands shook, told me she wasn't lying. "Do you know where he is?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Last time I saw him, he said he was in trouble. Said he needed to lay low for a while. He asked me to look after something for him." I leaned forward. "What?" She reached into her bag and slid a small manila envelope across the table. "He said if anything happened to him, I was supposed to give this to you." My heart stopped. I took the envelope, my fingers numb. Inside was a single key and a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was Mark's, hurried and jagged. If you're reading this, I'm sorry. I never wanted you in this mess. Go to the storage unit. Box 42, don't trust anyone, not even the cops. Tell no one. I closed my eyes, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, to demand more, but Jess just looked at me with pity. "Be careful," she said. "Whatever you think you know, you don't." I left the diner with the key clutched tight in my palm. My legs felt hollow, barely carrying me to the car. The world felt strange, like the air itself was turning against me. I sat in the driver's seat, reading and rereading the note, trying to make sense of it. Box 42, a storage unit. I tried to recall if Mark had ever mentioned one. Nothing. I called every storage facility in town, pretending to be him. Finally, at the third place, a woman answered and confirmed a unit under his name. I nearly collapsed with relief. I drove there, the key digging into my palm. The facility was a long row of corrugated metal doors, the kind of place you never notice unless you're looking for it. The woman at the desk didn't look twice as I walked past, my heart slamming in my chest. Unit 42 was halfway down the row. I unlocked it, the door screeching as it rolled up. Inside was a single cardboard box. My name was written on the top in black marker. I pulled it out, hands shaking. Inside were more photographs, stacks of old receipts, a burner phone, and a thick folder labeled Mortgage Foster House. There was also a flash drive taped to the lid. I sat on the cold concrete floor, rifling through the contents. The photos were of Mark, sometimes with Jess, sometimes alone. One set showed him in front of our house with a man I didn't recognize, bald, thick-necked, menacing. In every photo, Mark looked tense, anxious. The receipts were for hotels, meals, and large cash withdrawals. I recognized some of the dates, nights when Mark claimed to be working late. My throat tightened. The folder was heavier than I expected. I opened it and froze. The documents inside showed that our house had been refinanced 3 months ago, for twice its value. My signature was on the forms, but I'd never signed them. My stomach dropped. Forgery? Fraud. I fumbled with the flash drive, desperate to see what was on it. I didn't have a laptop with me, so I gathered everything and hurried home, locking the door behind me and double-checking the windows. I felt hunted, exposed. When I finally plugged the drive into my computer, my hands were slick with sweat. There were dozens of files, scanned documents, emails, even audio recordings. One file was a video, grainy and dark. I clicked play. Mark appeared on screen, his face pale and drawn. He spoke in a whisper. "M, if you're seeing this, it means something's happened to me. I'm sorry. I made mistakes. I was trying to help, but I got in over my head. If you can, take this to the police. Not the local cops, FBI. Only them. Trust no one else. They're watching." He looked terrified. I'd never seen him like that. Then, a noise off-screen. Mark flinched. The video ended. I sat there, shaking, trying to process it all. Forged documents, secret meetings, Mark in hiding, terrified. I thought about the text on the secret phone. Don't trust anyone, not even the police. And now Mark, begging me to go to the FBI. I barely slept that night. Every noise made me jump. I kept the flash drive with me, tucked in my bra, afraid someone might break in. In the morning, I called the FBI's tip line. My voice shook as I explained, barely coherent. The woman on the other end asked questions, took my name, told me someone would be in touch. I hung up, feeling exposed, and suddenly very, very alone. Not half an hour later, my doorbell rang. 2 men in cheap suits stood outside, flashing badges. "Special Agent Ward," the first one said. "This is Agent Kelly. Mind if we come in?" Something about them set my teeth on edge. Their eyes were too sharp, their questions too pointed. I told them about the storage unit, the flash drive, the video. They listened, but they didn't seem surprised. Ward asked, "Did your husband ever mention offshore accounts? Did he talk about anyone named Andreev?" I shook my head, bewildered. "No, who's that?" They exchanged a look. "If you remember anything, call us." They handed me a card and left as quickly as they'd come. As soon as the door closed, I called the FBI tip line again. This time, I asked for names. Were those agents real? The woman hesitated, then said, "We have no one by those names in your area. Be careful, ma'am." My blood turned to ice. Who had I just let into my home? That night, I slept with the lights on. I started noticing cars idling outside, people I didn't recognize watching me at the grocery store. The walls felt like they were closing in. Lorraine called, frantic. "Emily, I'm scared. There's a man parked outside my house. He's just sitting there watching." I wanted to reassure her, but I couldn't. I was terrified too. The next day, Jess called. Her voice was shaky. "They found me, Em. I have to go. Don't call me again. And don't trust anyone who says they're law enforcement. Not unless you see a badge, and even then, be careful." I felt the ground slipping beneath my feet. I tried to keep it together, for Lorraine, for myself. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's terrified face, heard his voice. Trust no one. I went back through the files on the flash drive, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. One email thread caught my eye. It was between Mark and a man named A. Andreev. The messages were cryptic, full of code words and references to the shipment, the exchange, and a date circled in red, next week. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I was running out of time. I had to figure out what Mark was involved in, before whatever happened to him happened to me too. The next morning, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. My heart stopped. I crept downstairs, clutching a baseball bat. The back door was wide open, a cold wind blowing through the kitchen. My laptop was gone. The box from the storage unit, gone. The burner phone, the photos, gone. But the flash drive was still with me. Whoever broke in hadn't found it. I called the police, my voice shaking. They took a report, barely interested. "Probably just a burglary, ma'am. Happens all the time." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the officer and shake him, tell him this was no random break-in. But I kept quiet. Mark's warning echoed in my head. That night, I slept in my car, parked 3 blocks away. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I spent the next day driving, trying to clear my head. I thought about running, leaving town, starting over somewhere new. But I couldn't leave Lorraine, and I couldn't leave Mark, not without knowing what happened to him. When I got home, there was an envelope taped to my front door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. "Stop digging. Next time we won't miss." My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. I called Lorraine, told her to pack a bag and come stay with me. I didn't tell her about the note. She was already terrified. That night, as I sat in the dark, holding the flash drive and listening to Lorraine snore softly in the guest room, I made a decision. I was done being afraid. I was done waiting for someone else to fix this. I would find out the truth, whatever it took, even if it destroyed me. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed down on your chest and made the world feel smaller. Lorraine shuffled into the kitchen, her hair a wild silver halo, eyes puffy from crying. I tried to make us coffee, but my hands kept shaking so badly I spilled the grounds all over the counter. She didn't comment. She just sat at the table, silent, wrapped in one of Mark's old cardigans. After breakfast, I told her I was going to the police again. She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Emily, please. You saw what happened last time. What if they're in on it?" The fear in her voice was raw, childlike. I didn't know how to reassure her, so I lied. "I'll be careful, I promise. I have to try." I left her there, staring into her mug as if she might find an answer at the bottom. I drove to the station, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd insist they take me seriously, how I'd mention the break-in, the threats, the missing evidence. But as I walked in, the world shifted. 2 men in plain suits were already talking to the desk sergeant. They turned when I entered, and something about the way they looked at me, too direct, too alert, made my stomach twist. I turned on my heel and walked right back out, heart hammering. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was seeing ghosts where there were only shadows. But Mark's voice echoed in my head. "Trust no one." I called the FBI tip line from a payphone outside the pharmacy, hoping for a different voice, a different answer. This time, a woman named Lisa picked up. Her tone was brisk but kind. I told her everything: Mark, the storage unit, the forged mortgage, the threats. She asked for the serial number of the flash drive, the details on the documents. She listened, really listened, and when I finished, she said, "Don't go to your house. Don't speak to anyone about this except me. Can you come to our office in the city, today?" I agreed before I could second-guess myself. I drove home, packed an overnight bag for me and Lorraine, and tried to sound calm when I told her we were leaving for a while. "We'll stay at a hotel. I need to get out of here." She nodded, not asking questions. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe she understood more than I realized. On the drive to the city, I watched the rearview mirror like a hawk. Every car felt like a threat, every face unfamiliar and suspicious. At the hotel, Lorraine collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep instantly. I sat at the little desk, staring at the flash drive, thinking about Mark. His voice on that video, the haunted look in his eyes. What had he gotten himself into? The next morning, I left Lorraine with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. I took a cab to the federal building downtown, clutching the flash drive in my coat pocket. The security guard eyed me but let me through. I gave Lisa's name at the desk. 10 minutes later, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense stride came to get me. "Emily, I'm Lisa. Come with me." She led me down a maze of beige hallways into a small, windowless room. I handed her the flash drive and started talking. Everything I knew, every fear, every strange encounter. She didn't interrupt, just listened, taking notes. When I finished, she sighed. "You did the right thing coming here. We've had our eye on Andrea for a while. He's connected to several fraud rings, money laundering, even human trafficking. Mark, it looks like he got too close. Maybe he thought he could help, but these people, once you're in, it's hard to get out." I felt the blood drain from my face. Is he alive?" She looked at me for a long moment. "We don't know, but we'll do everything we can." She gave me a burner phone and strict instructions. No contact with anyone from home. No going back until they cleared it. She promised to keep Lorraine safe too. I nodded, numb. Back at the hotel, Lorraine was awake, watching TV but not really seeing it. I told her a sanitized version of what Lisa had said. Mark was involved in something dangerous, the FBI was helping, but we had to stay quiet. She just nodded, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. Days passed in a blur. The FBI called every night, checking in, asking for details. I gave them everything I could remember: names, dates, places, anything. I tried to keep Lorraine calm, but she grew more anxious, jumping at every noise. One afternoon, my burner phone buzzed. It was Jess. I'm safe, out of state. I can't come back, but I wanted you to know, I found something. Mark left me a note, said if anything happened, to tell you, check the blue envelope. Does that mean anything to you?" I racked my brain, trying to remember. Blue envelope? Blue envelope? Then it hit me. Mark's old filing cabinet in the garage. There was a blue envelope tucked behind the drawers, where he kept old insurance policies. But the house was off limits. The FBI had said not to go back. Still, I couldn't let it go. I called Lisa, told her about the envelope. She promised to send a team. That night, I dreamt of Mark. He was standing on the other side of a glass wall, shouting, but I couldn't hear him. I woke with my heart pounding. The next morning, Lisa called. "We found the envelope. It's significant." She wouldn't say more, just that I needed to come into the office. When I arrived, she slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a string of numbers and letters, an account number, maybe, or a code. There was also a photograph. Mark, standing with a little girl in a park. The same girl from the storage unit photos. "Who is she?" I whispered. Lisa shook her head. "We don't know yet, but we're looking." Days turned into a week. The FBI sent agents to watch over Lorraine and me. I stopped sleeping, started pacing the hotel room at night, replaying every moment with Mark, every oddity I'd ignored. Then, one evening, Lisa called. "Emily, we have something. The account number, it's a safety deposit box, registered in your name. Mark must have set it up months ago. We want you to come with us to open it." We drove in silence to the bank. The vault was cold and echoing. The box was heavy. Inside were more documents, a thumb drive, and a handwritten note. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect you. I'm so sorry. Everything I did was for you and for her. Mark her, the girl in the photo." Lisa read over my shoulder. "Who do you think she is?" I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "I don't know." We copied everything in the box. The thumb drive held encrypted files, bank records, emails, spreadsheets. Money moved in and out, always in cash, always in small amounts. There was enough to make anyone look guilty. Lisa's team began to unravel the accounts. Every thread led back to Andreev, to a web of offshore companies, shell corporations, and aliases. But there was something else. A series of transfers to a private school across the country. Tuition payments. For a girl named Clara. I stared at the records, realization dawning, cold and slow. Mark was paying for her school, I whispered. He was taking care of her. Lisa looked at me, gentle. Do you know who her mother is? I shook my head, but deep down, I wondered. The woman from the photos. Jess. It all clicked, sudden and brutal. Jess's ex, the dangerous man, Andreev. Jess on the run, Mark helping her disappear. The child with Mark's eyes. He'd risked everything to protect them. And now, he was gone. I sat there, numb, as Lisa's team swept up the files, talking in low, urgent voices. I felt hollowed out, all my anger draining away, replaced by something raw. Grief, relief, and a strange pride. Mark had lied to me. He'd broken the law. He'd put us in danger. But he'd also saved a life. Maybe more than one. That night, I told Lorraine everything. She listened, silent, then reached across the bed to hold my hand. We'll get through this, she said, her voice soft but fierce. We're Fosters. We don't give up. And I believed her, because even as the world spun out, even as secrets threatened to swallow us whole, I felt something I hadn't felt since Mark disappeared. Hope. Hope felt strange, almost reckless, after so many days of fear. I clung to it anyway, like a stubborn weed growing through concrete. Every time Lorraine squeezed my hand, every time Lisa called with another update, I told myself we were getting closer. Not just to answers, but to an end. Lisa warned me the process would be slow. Every file from the safety deposit box had to be combed through, every payment traced. Still, knowing the FBI finally believed me, that I wasn't crazy or alone, kept me going. I even started sleeping for more than a few hours at a stretch. But the world outside our hotel room didn't change. I'd peek through the curtains and catch glimpses of men in nondescript sedans, sometimes just sitting, sometimes pretending to check their phones. The agents assigned to us rotated every couple of days, always in pairs, always alert. Lorraine cooked elaborate meals in the kitchenette, as if sheer force of habit could keep the dark things at bay. I let her, grateful for the normalcy. I called Jess, wanting to tell her what we'd found, but her phone was disconnected. The last time I'd heard her voice, she'd sounded so tired, so far away. I wondered where she and Clara were now. I wondered if they were safe. One afternoon, Lisa arrived at the hotel. She looked more worn than usual, her suit wrinkled, dark circles beneath her eyes. She sat at our table, spreading out a series of photographs, surveillance shots, grainy and blurred. We believe Andreev's men are still looking for Mark, she said quietly. And for you. My heart raced. Why? I'm nobody. I don't have anything. She shook her head. You do. That flash drive, those files. Mark must have uncovered something important, something that threatens them. It's not just money laundering, Emily. There's evidence of witness intimidation, possibly even a murder. I stared at the photos, trying to make sense of the faces, the places. One shot showed a man standing outside a playground fence, watching a little girl. Clara, I realized, from the purple backpack. Another was of Jess, hunched and hurried, glancing over her shoulder. Lisa leaned in. I need to ask you something. Did Mark ever mention a safe house? Somewhere he said you should go if things got bad? I shook my head. No, he just kept saying he'd handle it. He never wanted to worry me. She nodded, jotting something in her notebook. We're going to move you and Lorraine again, just to be safe. Pack your bags tonight. Leave everything else. Lorraine didn't complain. She moved through the motions as if she'd done it 100 times, folding sweaters, checking for stray pills in the bathroom, double-checking that we hadn't left anything behind. Her calmness soothed me, even as my insides twisted. The new apartment was smaller, deeper in the city, and the windows looked out onto a brick wall. But it was safe, or so the agents said. We settled in, and I tried to distract myself with small things. Crossword puzzles, organizing the spice rack, reading Lorraine's battered copy of Little Women for the 100th time. One evening, my burner phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in me knew to answer. A voice, urgent and low. It's Jess. I can't talk long. Clara and I are okay, but you can't trust anyone, not even your FBI contacts. There's someone on the inside, someone leaking information. My blood ran cold. Who? How do you know? She sounded on the verge of tears. Mark warned me. He said if anything happened, I should only talk to Lisa. Only her. Please, be careful. The call ended before I could say another word. I called Lisa immediately, relaying everything Jess had said. She went very still, her mouth a thin line. We suspected as much. There have been leaks. I'm sorry, Emily. This just got more dangerous. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation with Jess, trying to pick apart her words for a clue, something to help me protect Lorraine, to help me find Mark. The next day, Lisa asked me to come to the office again. She wanted me to look at some photos, to see if I recognized anyone from Mark's files or from the surveillance. Lorraine insisted on coming, and for once, the agents allowed it. We sat in a stark white conference room, a stack of images between us. Most were strangers, hard, suspicious faces, all sharp cheekbones and dead eyes. But then I saw him, the bald, thick-necked man from the storage unit photos, standing with Mark outside our house. In another, he was at the playground, watching Clara. Lisa watched me carefully. That's Sergei Andreev? She said. We believe he's running the entire operation. He's dangerous, Emily. Extremely dangerous. I swallowed. He was at our house. I saw him once, years ago. Mark said he was a client from work. Lisa nodded, unsurprised. That's how these people operate. They blend in, make themselves part of the scenery. We think Mark was working as a go-between, trying to help Jess and Clara get away. He may have been gathering evidence, too. My hands shook as I set the photo down. Did Mark know they were watching us? Lisa hesitated. I think he knew, yes. But he probably didn't realize how deep it went, or how high. The next few days blurred together. Lorraine and I jumped at every noise, every unfamiliar footstep in the hall. I started carrying the flash drive everywhere, tucked into the lining of my coat. I kept my phone off except for brief scheduled check-ins with Lisa. Then, one night, everything changed. I woke to Lorraine shaking me, her voice a desperate whisper. Emily, someone's in the hall. My heart thundered in my chest. I crept to the peephole. 2 men in dark suits were outside, speaking quietly. One of them had a badge clipped to his belt, but I couldn't make out the details. I called Lisa, whispering into the phone. She picked up after 2 rings. Don't open the door. I'm sending agents. Stay away from the windows. We crouched in the bathroom, clutching each other, until the real agents arrived, pounding on the door with the code phrase Lisa had taught me. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. The men were gone. Lisa arrived an hour later, her face grim. They're getting bold. We have to move you again. We packed in silence, escorted by a convoy of agents. I felt like a criminal, or a witness in a movie, someone whose life had been carved away, piece by piece, until only survival was left. The new safe house was a rented house in a quiet suburb, indistinguishable from 100 others. There was a garden in back, overgrown and wild. Lorraine took to it immediately, pulling weeds, planting pansies, as if she could anchor us here with roots and blossoms. I tried to focus on the investigation, on helping Lisa's team. But every night, the same question haunted me. Where was Mark? Was he hiding? Dead? Or somewhere out there, waiting for a sign that it was safe to come home? One afternoon, while Lorraine napped and the agents patrolled outside, my burner phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text. A single line. Meet me at the old train depot, midnight, come alone. I showed the message to Lisa. She paled. It could be a trap, or it could be Mark. We can't ignore it. She gave me a wire, a panic button, and a lecture about not taking risks, but I was past fear now. I needed answers. I needed closure. At midnight, I drove to the depot. The parking lot was deserted, lit only by the yellowed glow of a street lamp. I waited, heart in my throat, fingers tight on the steering wheel. A shadow moved at the edge of the lot. A man stepped into the light. It was Mark. He looked thinner, older, beard scruffy, clothes hanging off him. But it was him, my husband, alive. He slid into the passenger seat, eyes darting around. I'm sorry. I had to disappear. They were watching you. I couldn't risk. I grabbed his hand, tears streaming down my face. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you leave me in the dark? He squeezed my hand, his own shaking. I wanted to protect you. I never imagined it would get this bad. We sat in silence, the night thick around us. He told me everything, how Andreev blackmailed him, how he tried to help Jess and Clara escape, how he gathered evidence, hoping to bring the whole operation down, how he'd faked his own disappearance with Jess's help, trying to draw the danger away from us. I left clues for you, he whispered. I knew you'd figure it out. I just needed time. I laughed, half crazed. You could have trusted me. He smiled, sad and tired. I do. I always have. Headlights flashed across the lot. Mark tensed. You have to go. They're still watching. Give Lisa everything. Tell her I'm ready to testify. I wanted to scream, to drag him home, to keep him safe. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. He kissed my forehead, then melted into the shadows, gone as quickly as he'd come. I sat in the car, trembling, clutching the last warmth of his touch. I drove home, hope and terror braided tight in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I knew what I had to do. I was going to bring Andreev down. For Mark. For Lorraine. For Jess and Clara. For myself. The next morning, I barely recognized myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying. Yes, but there was something else too. A strange resolve. An undercurrent of steel where I'd only felt panic before. Mark was alive. He'd trusted me with the truth finally, even if it was only a sliver. That changed everything. I called Lisa as soon as the sun rose, my voice unsteady but determined. I told her about the meeting, how Mark was ready to testify, how he'd handed me the last piece we needed. She listened, barely breathing, then let out a shaky sigh. Emily, this is what we've been waiting for. But it means Andreev will be desperate now. He'll know Mark's back in play. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, watching Lorraine sleep, her face relaxed for the first time in days. I couldn't bear to wake her, not yet. Let her have her peace for a few more moments. Outside, I heard the agents talking, checking their radios, the careful code of people who know danger is close. Lisa arrived with a flurry of agents before noon, her face set and pale. She carried a briefcase and a folder thick with documents, everything we had, everything Mark had given us. She laid it all out on the dining table, and together we started to assemble the timeline, every payment, every transfer, every whispered threat. The pieces began to fit, a grim mosaic of fear and greed. But now, there were dates and names and enough evidence to force action. We have enough to move on, Andreev, Lisa told me, voice low. But we need Mark, physically. His testimony, in person, will break this open. Will you protect him? I asked. I hated how small my voice sounded. We'll do everything we can, but we need to move quickly. The day passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Lorraine cooked again, her hands busy with dough and spices, as if the act itself might keep us tethered to something good. I couldn't eat. My stomach twisted with every ring of my phone, every footstep outside. Late that night, Mark texted from a new number. Ready? Tell Lisa. Old Bridge, midnight. Alone. Lisa and her team prepared in silence, their tension contagious. I was briefed again and again. What to say, what not to say, how to signal for help. I tried to memorize it all, but my mind kept slipping back to Mark's face in that flickering streetlight, the way he looked at me with so much sorrow and love. At midnight, I stood at the edge of the old bridge, the air heavy and damp. Mark stepped from the shadows, hands raised. Lisa's agents moved in fast, surrounding him, hustling him into a waiting car. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, but Lisa stopped me with a gentle touch. "It's not safe yet. Soon, I promise." I watched the convoy disappear into the night, my heart beating so hard it hurt. The next morning, news broke. Federal raids across the state, arrests, freezing of accounts. Andreev was caught trying to board a private jet. Photos of him in handcuffs splashed across every news site. The words, "criminal ring" and "federal indictment" became the drumbeat of every headline. Lisa called, triumphant but wary. "We did it, because of you and Mark. But you need to stay put for now. There are still people out there who might want revenge." I nodded, numb with relief, and went to find Lorraine. She was in the garden, hands buried in the dirt, humming softly to herself. When I told her, she wept, big, shuddering sobs that shook her whole body. I held her, feeling the tremor pass from her bones to mine. The days that followed felt strange, suspended between fear and freedom. The FBI checked in daily. Agents still watched the house, but their posture was looser now, less tense. The world outside seemed to move on, but for us, every hour was an echo of what we'd lost, of what we might get back. One evening, Lisa appeared with a small, tired smile. "It's safe now. Mark can come home." She drove me to the safe house where Mark had been staying. I walked through the door and found him sitting at a battered kitchen table, hair trimmed, beard gone, eyes clear for the first time in months. We stared at each other, uncertain. Then he opened his arms, and I ran to him, all the grief and anger dissolving into relief. He held me for a long time, neither of us speaking. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Em. I never should have left you alone in this." I pulled back, searching his face. "Promise me, no more secrets." He nodded, voice cracking. "No more." We drove home together. Lorraine met us at the door, tears streaming down her cheeks. She hugged Mark so hard he laughed, the sound wild and unfamiliar. We sat together on the porch as the sun set, not talking about the past, just grateful for the present. But peace wasn't easy. The world we returned to felt different, fragile. Mark was changed, quieter, watchful. He started therapy, and sometimes he woke up in the night, gasping for air. I'd hold him until the trembling passed, and in the mornings we'd drink coffee in silence, just grateful to be together. Lisa called often, updating us on the case. Andreev was facing life in prison. Jess and Clara were safe, living in another state under new names. Jess wrote once, a brief email. "Thank you. You saved us. Be safe. Jay." Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the garden still, I'd catch Mark staring out the window, lost in thought. I knew he was haunted by the things he'd seen, the choices he'd made. I was too. But we were alive. We had each other. One night, Mark turned to me, voice trembling. "I want to meet Clara. I need to see her, just once." I hesitated, fear coiling in my chest. But I saw the need in his eyes, the ache for closure. "Let me talk to Lisa," I said. "If it's safe, we'll find a way." Lisa was cautious, but agreed to reach out to Jess. Weeks passed before we heard back. Then, one morning, Lisa called. "Jess agreed. A public park, quick and quiet. No contact after. Is that okay?" Mark nodded, his face a study in hope and dread. We drove to the park, my heart in my throat. Jess was waiting on a bench, Clara beside her, clutching a battered stuffed rabbit. Mark hung back, watching them from a distance, tears streaming down his face. He didn't approach, didn't speak. After a few minutes, Jess looked up, met his eyes, and nodded once. Clara waved, uncertain but smiling. It was enough. We drove home in silence, Mark's hand in mine. He wept that night, quietly, and I held him, wishing I could carry some of his pain. The case dragged on for months. We testified in court, our lives laid bare before strangers. The papers called us heroes, but all I felt was exhaustion and an odd, cautious gratitude. We'd survived. We'd fought back. We'd found a way through. Lorraine planted a rosebush in the garden, red and wild and stubborn. She said it was for all of us, proof that something beautiful could grow from ruin. I believed her. I started writing again, the words coming slow but sure, each one a step away from fear and back toward myself. Mark found work with a local charity, helping others who'd lost their way. Sometimes he'd come home tired, but lighter, as if helping others could help him heal. We never forgot what we'd been through, but we learned how to live with it, to let the past be a shadow, not a cage. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the light slanted just right and the garden was full of birdsong, I'd remember the emptiness of those first days, the fear, the doubt, the loneliness, and I'd whisper a thank you for the chance to begin again, for the courage I'd found hidden deep inside, for the voices, mine, Lorraine's, Jess's, even Mark's, finally heard, for the truth, however jagged, that set us free. For the first time in months, the world felt almost ordinary again, though I knew it would never be simple, not really. In the quiet aftermath, there were things I never expected. The stubborn ache of distrust that lingered in my bones, the way I startled at footsteps in the hallway, or the shiver that passed through me every time the phone rang unexpectedly. But we were alive. We were safe, or as safe as anyone can be after your life's been upended and rebuilt from the ground up. Lorraine's rosebush flourished. She tended it every morning, humming a tune I remembered from my childhood, the one she'd sung when Mark and I were first dating. Sometimes I'd join her, pulling weeds or just sitting nearby, the sun on my face, grateful for the smallness of these moments. Sometimes Mark would join us too. He was quieter than before, his gaze softer, as if he saw the world with new, more fragile eyes. At night, he'd still wake with nightmares, and I'd hold him, tracing circles on his back until he settled. We had learned, in those long, sleepless hours, that love wasn't a fortress. It was a shelter, ragged at the edges, but still holding. The legal aftermath stretched out, as these things do. Our testimony was picked apart, Mark's past mistakes paraded for the world to see. There were days I hated him for his secrets, for the danger he brought to our doorstep, for the lies that still echoed between us. But most days, I remembered the fear in his eyes and the desperate, beautiful way he'd risked everything to protect a little girl who wasn't his, a woman who'd had nowhere else to turn. Most days, I forgave him. Some days, I even managed to forgive myself, for not knowing, for not asking more, for not being braver sooner. Lisa became a fixture in our lives. She'd stop by for coffee, sometimes with news, sometimes just to sit quietly with us in the garden. There was a kindness in her that went deeper than her badge, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, not even Mark. I told her about the nights I'd lain awake, wishing I could disappear, about the way anger and guilt sometimes twisted together until I didn't know which was which. She listened, never judging, always patient. Jess and Clara faded into our past, as they had to. The government had given them new names, a new life somewhere far away. Occasionally, a postcard would arrive. No return address, just a few lines in Jess's neat handwriting. Clara started school today. She misses the swing in your backyard. Or, we're safe. Thank you for everything. I kept the postcards in a box on my nightstand. Proof, I suppose, that the pain had meant something, that the risk had been worth it. The neighborhood moved on. People whispered, of course, they always do. Some avoided us, uncomfortable with the headlines, the rumors, the lingering threat of danger. Others brought casseroles, awkwardly cheerful, as if they could bake away the memory of police cars and news vans parked on our street. Lorraine accepted every dish with a gracious smile, stacking the freezer full. "It's how people say they care," she told me. "Let them." Mark struggled more than I did. The therapy helped, but some wounds healed slowly. He threw himself into his new job at the charity, working with families who'd lost loved ones to violence or addiction. Sometimes he'd come home with red eyes, hands trembling. I learned not to press, just to sit with him in the dark. The silence between us no longer a wall, but a kind of gentle understanding. One afternoon, months after the trial, I found Mark in the garage, sorting through old boxes. He was holding the blue envelope, the one that had started everything. "What should we do with this?" he asked, voice small. "Burn it? Keep it?" I sat beside him on the concrete floor, dust motes spinning in the golden light. "I think we keep it, as a reminder, not of what we lost, but of what we survived." He nodded, shoulders relaxing, and tucked the envelope away with our family photos. There were moments still when the past intruded. A car idling too long outside. A strange face at the grocery store. I kept the panic at bay by focusing on the present, on Lorraine's laughter, Mark's steady breathing beside me at night, the softness of our sheets, the hum of the refrigerator. I learned that safety wasn't a place, but a practice, a choice I made every day. Lisa called one morning with news. "Andreev pleaded guilty," she said, relief in her voice. "He won't be getting out, not ever." I let the words sink in. The threat was truly gone. Still, I asked, "What about the others?" "There will always be others," Lisa said gently. "But you're not alone, and you're not powerless." It was the truth, and it wasn't. There are dangers that never truly leave you, wounds that become part of who you are. But I was learning to live with them, to let them shape me without breaking me. Lorraine grew bolder, venturing beyond the garden, joining a book club at the library. She made friends, invited them for tea, and our house filled with laughter and the scent of baking. I marveled at her resilience, the way she rebuilt her life piece by piece. Mark and I learned to talk again, about the hard things, the silent things. Sometimes, we argued, the old pain surfacing and snapping between us. But we always found our way back, sometimes with apologies, sometimes with a simple touch. I started writing a memoir, pouring the chaos and fear and stubborn hope onto the page. The words came slowly, but they came. Seasons changed. The rose bush bloomed, then faded, then bloomed again. One chilly autumn morning, Mark and I stood together in the garden, watching the leaves drift down. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have to think. "No," I said, "not if it brought us here." He nodded, pulling me close, and for the first time, I felt the future opening up. Uncertain, yes, but ours to shape. There was a quiet beauty in the ordinary now. A cup of coffee shared at dawn. Lorraine humming in the kitchen. The sound of Mark's laughter, low and surprised, as if he'd forgotten what joy felt like and was learning all over again. I realized then that survival wasn't just about living through the storm. It was about finding the courage to plant new things in the wreckage, to risk hope again. And so, slowly, we did. We rebuilt not the life we'd had, but something stronger, something more honest. We stopped hiding from each other, from the world, from ourselves. And in that hard-won honesty, I finally found peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding, of moving forward, together, unwritten no more. The winter that followed was the quietest we'd had in years. Snow blanketed the yard, muffling the outside world, making our home feel like a secret place set apart from everything that had come before. I took to lighting candles in the kitchen in the early evenings, the soft glow making the whole house seem warmer, safer somehow. Mark and I moved through those months gently, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace we'd earned. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his eyes full of a guilt I couldn't fully erase, but had learned not to resent. I knew my own face held shadows too, moments when fear would flare for no reason, memories flickering behind my eyes while I folded laundry or poured tea. Lorraine, though, thrived. She seemed to draw strength from the simple acts of daily living, kneading bread, mending socks, brushing the snow off the rosebush she'd insisted on protecting through frost and storm. One afternoon, I found her on the porch, bundled in a thick sweater, reading to a neighbor's child who'd wandered over. Her voice was low, steady, each word spun like a lifeline. She glanced up at me and smiled. "We build the world we want to live in, one kindness at a time." That was Lorraine, faith stitched into every gesture. I tried to follow her lead. I volunteered at the library, shelving books, helping a shy teenager with her college application essays. The smallness of those acts steadied me. Sometimes, when I found myself lost in thought, I'd reach for the blue envelope in my nightstand drawer, running my fingers over the worn paper, remembering everything it had taken to get here. The trial's aftermath faded from the headlines, but not from our lives. I'd still get the occasional call from Lisa, checking in, sharing news of another conviction, another loose end tied up. She'd ask how we were, and I'd tell her honestly, better, but not untouched. She understood. There were setbacks, of course. One cold morning, Mark came in from getting the mail, his face pale. He held out a plain white envelope, no return address, just our names in block letters. I opened it with trembling hands, expecting the worst. But inside was only a single sheet of paper. "You're safe, for now." No signature, nothing else. Fear returned, sudden and sharp. I called Lisa immediately. She sent an agent who dusted the letter for prints and assured us it was probably nothing. Someone playing a cruel joke, a reminder from the past, not a present threat. Still, for a week, I barely slept. Mark started locking every door twice. Lorraine left the porch light on all night, as if defiance alone could keep us safe. But nothing else happened. The world kept turning, and slowly, we let ourselves believe again that safety was possible. The letter had another effect, though. It made me realize how much I'd let fear dictate my life, even after the danger had passed. I didn't want to live in its shadow anymore. So, I made a choice. To reclaim my days, one ordinary act at a time. I baked bread with Lorraine, letting the dough rise in the warmth of the kitchen. I let Mark drag me out to movies, to the local farmer's market, to concerts in the park. He started playing the piano again, the old upright he'd ignored for years, and the music filled the house with hope and memory. I wrote every morning, sometimes just a few sentences, sometimes pages that poured out of me like a confession. I wrote about fear, but also about grace, about the way survival is an act of stubborn love. Mark's charity work deepened. He started a support group for families whose loved ones had disappeared, sitting in church basements with people who wore the same haunted expressions we'd worn not so long ago. Sometimes he'd come home with stories, tragedies, miracles, the stubbornness of people who refused to give up searching. It healed him, I think, to help others piece their lives back together. It healed me too, to see him coming back to himself, little by little. The holidays arrived, and with them, a bittersweet joy. Lorraine insisted we host Thanksgiving, despite my protests. She invited everyone, neighbors, friends from her book club, even Lisa, who surprised us by showing up with a homemade pie and a smile that hinted at a life outside of government files. The house overflowed with laughter and the smell of roasting turkey. For a few hours, we were just another family, chaos and all. After the guests left, Mark and I stood by the window, watching the snow fall. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "Miss what?" I replied. "The certainty, before everything changed." I thought about it, the ache of nostalgia sharp in my chest. Sometimes, but certainty was an illusion. I'd rather have the truth, even when it hurts. He nodded, his arm coming around my shoulders. We stood together in the hush, grateful for the honesty that now bound us tighter than any secret ever could. New Year's came, and with it, a sense of cautious optimism. I wrote resolutions, nothing grand, just intentions to live a little braver, to keep choosing hope over fear. Mark scribbled his on a slip of paper. Be present, forgive, begin again. Lorraine wrote only one word: bloom. The weeks that followed were slow, tender, full of small beginnings. I started reading my memoir drafts to Mark, letting him see the story through my eyes. Sometimes he'd wince at his own choices. Sometimes he'd laugh at memories I'd nearly forgotten. He encouraged me to submit the manuscript to a publisher, and for the first time, I felt ready. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail, a thick envelope with a publisher's logo in the corner. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, a contract, an advance, a letter full of praise for my story, and an offer to share it with the world. I laughed and cried at the same time, Lorraine and Mark wrapping me in hugs, their pride shining through the tears. Publication brought new challenges, media requests, interviews, people asking for details I wasn't always ready to share. But it also brought purpose. I spoke at events, on panels, to small groups of women who'd survived their own storms. I listened to their stories, feeling the weight and power of so many unwritten lives. Through it all, Lorraine's rosebush bloomed stubbornly, even in the snow, a reminder that roots can hold, even after the worst of winters. And when the world seemed too loud, too demanding, I'd return to the garden, or to Mark's music, or to the steady ritual of brewing coffee at dawn. These were the anchors, the proof that we'd not just survived, but found a way to thrive. Sometimes, in the hush of the evening, I'd think of Jess and Clara, of Lisa and her quiet strength, of all the women whose stories had crossed mine. I'd whisper a wish for them, for safety, for hope, for peace. And in that moment, I'd remember that being unwritten isn't about erasure, it's about possibility. And I knew, deep down, that I was ready to begin again, no matter what the future held. Spring crept back with a shy promise, green shoots poking through the frost, the garden waking up as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Lorraine's roses exploded into color, and she was outside at first light, pruning and whispering to the new buds as if they might listen. I found myself following her lead, letting the sunlight coax me out of old shadows. I dusted off my running shoes and took slow, meandering walks around the neighborhood, nodding to neighbors who had, at first, avoided my gaze, but now smiled back, tentative but genuine. The book changed things more than I expected. When it came out, I braced for a wave of judgment or curiosity, but what came instead was connection. Letters from strangers arrived, tucked between bills and catalogs, women writing to say they'd felt invisible too, that my story gave them courage to face their own secrets. Some told me things they'd never told anyone: a husband's betrayal, a childhood escape, the slow ache of rebuilding a life. I read each letter in the garden, letting their words settle into me, rooting me in a community I'd never expected. Mark watched all this with quiet pride, but there were days when he seemed distant, lost in memories he rarely voiced. I learned to let him have those silences, trusting that he'd return when he was ready. Some nights, though, he'd sit at the piano, playing soft, tentative melodies that filled the house with a hope I couldn't name. One afternoon, Lisa stopped by, no badge this time, just a box of pastries and a new haircut. She looked younger, lighter, as if laying down the weight of the case had let her breathe again. We sat on the porch with coffee and lemon bars, talking about everything and nothing. She asked if I regretted going public with our story. I thought about it for a moment. Sometimes I worry I've exposed too much, that I've made it harder for Mark or for Lorraine. But then I get another letter, and I remember, our silence never protected us. Telling the truth did. Lisa nodded. You're braver than most people I know. I laughed. I was just desperate. Desperation looks a lot like courage from a distance. She left with a promise to visit again soon, and I realized how much I'd come to rely on her steady presence. Weeks passed in that soft, golden way only spring can bring. Lorraine hosted garden parties, her laughter carrying through the open windows. Mark's support group grew, families coming from other towns, drawn by word of mouth, and the quiet assurance that here, they'd be heard. I was asked to speak at a women's conference in the city, a room full of strangers, the kind of crowd that used to terrify me. This time, I stood at the podium and told the story not just of fear and survival, but of what it meant to write myself back into my own life. After my talk, a woman waited for me in the hallway, her hands shaking as she clutched my book. "How did you trust again?" she whispered. "How did you let yourself love after all that?" I didn't have an easy answer. I still work at it, every day, but I decided I deserved more than just surviving. I wanted to live. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for saying it out loud." I drove home that night with the city lights trailing behind me, feeling both emptied out and filled up at the same time. The world kept shifting. Sometimes I missed the sharpness of adrenaline, the clarity of crisis. But mostly, I was grateful for the slow, messy business of healing, the unfinished conversations, the awkward apologies, the way forgiveness came in fits and starts. Mark and I had our share of rough days. Sometimes the old wounds reopened. We argued about money, about boundaries, about the shape of our future. Once, after a particularly tense morning, he found me in the garden, knees in the dirt, tears streaming down my face. He crouched beside me, pulled me close, and for a long time we just breathed together. The earth cool beneath us, the roses wild overhead. "We're not who we were before," I said. He nodded, his voice thick. "No, but we're still here." That became our refrain. Whenever one of us faltered, the other would say it. "We're still here." Lorraine's health wavered in late spring. She grew tired more easily, her laughter softer, edged with fatigue. Mark and I took turns taking her to appointments, bringing her tea, fussing over her in ways that made her roll her eyes and call us mother hens. One evening, as I tucked a blanket around her shoulders, she squeezed my hand. "Don't waste your time waiting for perfect, Em. Life's in the trying. That's all any of us can do." She dozed off in her chair, and I sat with her, listening to the rise and fall of her breathing, feeling the preciousness of that ordinary moment. We celebrated her birthday in June, the house full of flowers and friends, Lisa and her partner bringing a chocolate cake, Mark at the piano playing Lorraine's favorite waltz. For a moment, looking around at the people who had carried us through, I saw not the losses, but the abundance. Every person in that room had chosen to stay, to help, to forgive. As the sun set, Lorraine raised her glass. "To second chances, and to the women who make them possible." We toasted, laughter ringing through the open windows, the garden bathed in golden light. After everyone left, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the night birds. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd shed and outgrown, all the ways fear had tried to silence me. I thought of Jess and Clara, out there somewhere, living their new lives. I thought of the letters from women I'd never meet, their words twining with mine. And I realized that the most powerful thing I'd done wasn't surviving the storm. It was choosing, over and over, to begin again, to trust, to speak, to love, even after everything. Spring faded into summer, and I found myself dreaming about the future. Not in grand, sweeping arcs, but in small, bright flashes. Another book, a trip to the ocean, the hope of more ordinary days. I had no illusions that pain was done with us, or that the world would always be kind. But I'd learned to live with uncertainty, to greet it like an old companion, to walk forward anyway. The garden was wild, unruly, bursting with life. I let it grow. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt not just unwritten, but wide open, ready for whatever came next. Summer settled over us with a generosity I hadn't expected. The days stretched long and honey-colored, the house and garden alive with warmth and the low hum of possibility. Lorraine, despite her spells of fatigue, insisted on fresh air every day. We'd sit together beneath the old maple, lemonade sweating in our glasses, her stories unspooling one by one. Some I'd heard 100 times, others new and glimmering, bits of her past she'd never shared before. Mark would join us when he could, and sometimes it felt as if the three of us were a small island, floating serenely while the world spun on. It was the first summer since everything that I wasn't looking over my shoulder every time a car slowed on our street. The agents had long since disappeared. Lisa, now a friend rather than a guardian, came by less often, her life busy with new cases and, I suspected, new happiness. Once, she brought her partner with her for dinner, and I watched as Lorraine welcomed them with the ease of a woman who'd weathered so many storms she no longer questioned the shape of family. The book's success opened doors I'd never dared imagine. I was asked to write essays, to speak at colleges, to consult on a documentary about resilience. Sometimes, the attention felt like a second skin I couldn't quite peel off. At other times, it was a lifeline, connecting me to women who'd walked through their own darkness and come out blinking into the light. Their stories poured in, raw, complicated, unvarnished. I kept every letter, every email. I answered as many as I could, scribbling encouragement, sometimes just sitting with their pain, letting it settle alongside my own. Mark's support group continued to grow, the circle of chairs in the church basement filling week after week. He brought home stories, never names, always with reverence. "People just want to be seen," he told me one night, his voice rough. "They want to know what happened to them matters." I understood that in my bones. I saw how the telling healed him, little by little, the way the garden healed me, and the writing, painful as it could be, stitched me back together. We argued, sometimes, about the shape of our new lives. Mark wanted to travel, to leave the town that now felt too small for him. I clung to the familiar, to Lorraine, to the garden that had anchored me when everything else was chaos. Our disagreements were quieter than before. Less a battle, more a conversation. We were learning still how to want different things and still find our way back to each other. The letters from Jess and Clara stopped midsummer, as I knew they would. It was safer for them to disappear into their new lives. Still, on certain evenings, I'd find myself looking out into the twilight, thinking of Clara's shy wave, Jess's tired smile. I sent my hope after them like a prayer. Be safe, be free, be loved. As the days grew hotter, Lorraine's health faded a little more. She grew thinner, her hair softer, her voice sometimes barely a whisper. She refused to see it as decline. "I'm just making space," she teased, "for all the new things I still want to learn." We fussed over her, hovering, but she brushed us off, determined to spend her strength on living, not on worry. One afternoon, as cicadas buzzed and the sun painted everything gold, she took my hand. "Promise me something, Em," she said. "Promise me you won't let the hard things close you off again. There will always be storms. Don't forget how to reach for the light." I squeezed her fingers, my throat tight. "I promise." That night, Mark and I lay awake, the fan ticking softly above us, our hands clasped between us. "I'm scared," he admitted, the words so quiet I almost missed them. "Scared of losing her. Scared of losing us." I turned to face him in the darkness, brushing his cheek with my thumb. "Me too. But we're not the same people we were. We know how to hold on now, even when it hurts." He nodded, and for the first time, I felt us both believe it. Lorraine's decline was gentle, as if she was slowly returning herself to the earth she loved. The neighbors came by, bringing flowers and casseroles, offering stories and hands to hold. I watched as the community gathered around us, weaving us into their lives not as a family marked by tragedy, but as one stitched together by resilience and grace. The night Lorraine passed, the house was full of quiet. Mark and I sat on either side of her, holding her hands, telling her how loved she was. She smiled at us, her eyes shining, and whispered, "I told you we'd bloom again." Then, as the stars came out, she slipped away, as peaceful as the hush between two heartbeats. The grief was vast and sharp, but not crushing. It was threaded with gratitude. Gratitude for every morning in the garden, every story, every stubborn, beautiful petal she coaxed into bloom. We buried her with a clipping from her rosebush, the petals pale pink, the scent fresh and bright. The days that followed were a blur of arrangements and condolences, memories surfacing like driftwood on a slow river. Mark and I moved through them together, our grief shared, the old wounds softened by the new ones. One morning, after the last visitor had gone, I found a letter from Lorraine tucked into my nightstand. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were sure. If you're reading this, I've gone on ahead. Don't be afraid. You already know how to survive the worst. Now promise me you'll live the best you can. Forgive, love, risk joy, and plant something new. Always. All my love, L. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears spilling down my cheeks. I felt her everywhere, in the garden, in the kitchen, in every corner of the life we'd rebuilt. As summer waned, Mark and I began to talk, really talk, about what came next. He wanted to see the ocean, to travel with me, to step out of the long shadow our story had cast. I wanted to write another book, this time about Lorraine, about legacy, about how the women before us shape who we become. We compromised, as we'd learned to do. We planned a trip, just the two of us, the first in years. I packed Lorraine's letter, a handful of rose petals, and the blue envelope that had started it all. On the morning we left, I stood in the garden, fingers pressed into the dark, fragrant soil. I whispered my thanks, not just to Lorraine, but to every version of myself that had gotten me here. I promised to keep blooming, to keep reaching for the sun, even when the storms returned. Mark took my hand as we walked to the car, the house behind us glowing in the early light. We drove away, the road unwinding ahead, open and bright. And for the first time, I truly believed. We were not just survivors. We were alive, and the story was ours to write. We drove for hours, letting the landscape unspool around us, fields giving way to forests, then to the soft blue promise of the horizon. It felt strange, almost illicit, to be free with no destination except forward. Mark reached across the console, his hand finding mine, and I squeezed back, both of us quiet in a way that felt full, not empty. Sometimes the best conversations happen in silence, the road humming beneath you, the world wide open. We stopped when we felt like it, at roadside diners with cracked vinyl booths, at little antique stores where I picked up an old teacup for Lorraine's memory, at rest stops where we just breathed in the salt-tinged air and let the wind tangle our hair. We laughed more than I expected. Mark told me stories from his childhood I'd never heard, and I found myself doing the same, each of us peeling back layers we'd hidden even from ourselves. When we reached the coast, it was dusk, the sky streaked purple and orange, the ocean roaring beyond the dunes. We walked down to the water's edge, shoes in hand, waves curling around our ankles. I thought of Lorraine, her voice urging me to risk joy, to plant something new. I dug into my pocket and found the rose petals I'd brought. Together, Mark and I scattered them into the surf, the pink blooms swirling away, soft as a benediction. "I miss her," Mark said, his voice raw. "Me too," I whispered. "But she's here, in us, in this." He nodded, pulling me close as we watched the petals drift, their color vivid against the blue-gray water until they disappeared. That night, in the small inn overlooking the ocean, I wrote for hours, words pouring out of me like the tide. I wrote about Lorraine, about Mark, about Jess and Clara, about the fear that had once ruled me and the slow, stubborn hope that had taken its place. I wrote about the way grief and love can live in the same house, about the courage it takes to keep opening doors after you've been hurt. Mark read over my shoulder, his hand warm on my back. "You should let people see this," he said. "It's not just for us." I smiled, remembering the first time he'd said those words, how I'd doubted myself. I didn't anymore. I understood now that stories only matter when they're shared, when they break the silence and remind us we're not alone. The next morning, we drove up the coast, letting the days string together, unhurried. We hiked along windswept cliffs, ate seafood in tiny shacks, watched the sunrise from the beach bundled in blankets. I started a new journal, this one not about survival, but about presence. Notes on the way the air smelled after rain, the color of Mark's eyes in morning light, the peace that came from letting go of certainty. Sometimes, the old fears crept in. A strange car behind us on a lonely road, a news headline about another crime, another woman gone missing. But I'd learned not to let fear be the last word. I breathed through it, reached for Mark's hand, called Lisa for a voice of reason if I needed to. I let myself feel it, then let it pass. We returned home changed, not by distance, but by the simple act of giving ourselves permission to live beyond our scars. The house welcomed us, familiar and new. The rosebush was in full bloom, wild and fragrant, the garden humming with bees. I knelt in the dirt, planting seeds for late summer flowers, Lorraine's letter tucked safe in my pocket. Mark started playing music in the evenings again, the notes drifting through open windows, mingling with the scent of cut grass and sun-warmed earth. The neighbors waved, dropped by with fresh bread or tomatoes, their kindness unspoken but deeply felt. I finished my second book, this one about legacy, about Lorraine, about what it means to grow through what you go through. My publisher loved it. The advance would help send a neighbor's daughter to college, a small circle of goodness radiating out from our pain. Sometimes, I'd still wake in the night, heart pounding, the echo of old terror in my chest. But I'd listen to the steady breathing beside me, the house settling around us, and I'd remember. Safety is never guaranteed, but hope is something you choose, again and again. As summer tipped toward fall, I stood in the garden, hands in the soil, Lorraine's words echoing in my mind. Plant something new, always. So I did. Every day, in small ways, offering a kind word, reaching out to a friend, daring to believe that even broken things can bloom. I am not the woman I was before. I am older, softer, braver. I know now that survival is only the beginning, that the real work is in the living, in the loving, in the choosing to show up, imperfect, unwritten, fully alive. My story isn't finished, none of ours are. But I am here, rooted and reaching, ready for whatever comes next. And I am no longer afraid to write the rest. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Subscribe if this story finds you, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from?